We have hugely consequential breaking news at this hour. Iraqi State TV is reporting that in a strike, the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani was killed, along with the head of an Iran-backed militia in Iraq. Qasem Soleimani is one of the most important figures in the Middle East, arguably the most important figure in Iran. He runs the Quds Force. He has been active in Syria. He has been active in the fight against ISIS. He's been active in Iran. He's been active in Lebanon with Hezbollah. If, in fact, Iraqi state television and other Iraqi officials who said that Qasem Soleimani has been killed, presumably by the Americans, if, in fact, that is accurate, and it looks at this moment like a lot of people are saying that, though not yet confirmed, that is an almost incomprehensibly massive escalation in the current tensions with the Iranian government. Imagine, for instance, the Revolutionary Guard assassinating David Petraeus in 2007, something on the order of that. Joining me now just to talk about the latest reports and what we're hearing is Cal Perry, who, of course, reported from Iraq during the war and thereafter. Cal, what do we know here?
Well, we know, as you've said, that Iraqi state television is reporting that the senior Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani has been killed in what they're saying is either a rocket attack or an American drone attack. Various Iranian news outlets are also reporting that. What we have not heard from yet is anything official from the Iranian government or indeed the American government. But as you say, it's an impossible almost moment to imagine. This would change irrevocably things between the United States and Iran. It would put the two nations on a track to a conflict. This is one of the untouchable figures, if you like, inside Iranian society. I'll give you an example. The Israelis, on multiple occasions in the last 10 to 15 years, had considered or had put plans in motion to maybe kill Soleimani, and they were backed down by the Americans. This has always been seen as a man you do not touch. He's a man who pops up in Iranian news footage visiting Hezbollah forces in Iraq, visiting pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, and indeed in Syria. He is a huge figure in Iran. He is probably the second most powerful man in Iran. So really a potentially historic moment. And we will know tonight. This is the kind of strike, the kind of assassination that would dictate that we hear from the American president, from President Trump, if in fact this is true. And again, looking at screens here of Middle East news networks, it certainly appears as though Qasem Soleimani has been killed in Baghdad.
Cal, I want you to stick with us. I'm going to bring in Dan Ben-Naim, who worked at the State Department under Hillary Clinton, was a speechwriter for John Kerry, also worked in the Vice President's Office on national foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, an area where you have a lot of expertise. What is the significance of this?
I mean, this is just a seismic, explosive development. Tensions between America and Iran since Trump had walked out of the Iran deal had been kind of at a slow boil, caught in between a war that neither side really wanted and a peace that they couldn't quite consummate. This is a whole new phase. This is a whole new level. And I don't think there's any real going back or yeah.
Will the Iranians interpret this as essentially the declaration of a shooting war?
You know, I think that they probably still don't want to get into a full-on bombing campaign shooting war, but they are going to try to cause a tremendous amount of pain in response to this and probably view this escalation as one that they have to counter with an escalation and pain point of their own. And they have networks and outreach all across the Middle East that extend beyond the Middle East. Now, Soleimani himself is a man who has blood on his hands from people all across the Middle East and is responsible for a great many deaths.
Thousands of times over, literally.
Thousands of times over, including Iraqi protesters, peaceful protesters recently, who he seemed to have traveled to the country and ordered to have killed by Iraqi militias. So this is not a person who Americans should mourn in any way. But the question at the end of this is whether we're now on a slippery slope toward a much greater conflict with Iran, and whether this leaves the Middle East safer. The Middle East is safer with Qasem Soleimani out of it, but the way that this has been done, if it's us, if it's accurate, if it's true, could well lead us in a much more dangerous place than we were before.
I think it's worth, as people sort of process this news and the players to them are maybe a little opaque, just to step back and look at the context here. I mean, President Trump ran on getting out of the nuclear deal with Iran. He then did so. One of the arguments that opponents of the deal said was, well, the deal's about nuclear weapons, but you haven't dealt with all this other things the Iranians are doing. And Obama and others like yourself who worked in that administration said, yeah, right, we separated them out. But what it seems to me has happened is since leaving the deal, all of the other stuff's gotten worse. I mean, there's been more provocation, more tit for tat, worse kind of relations and violence actually in the wake of the deal than there was during the deal.
You know, Iranian misbehavior in a lot of ways has been pretty steady throughout. You've seen it, you saw it in some cases after the deal was formed, and you've seen it now. And what's really different is this backdrop. I think there is an increase in aggressiveness and an escalation on both sides. And I think when you left the deal, what you had was people warning that you were going to have this kind of escalation. I mean, some of President Trump's own advisors, I'm sure, told him that if you left this deal, you would risk having folks get killed in Iraq and risk having America thrown out of Iraq, which may yet happen.
And this is the one of the linchpins here, right, is that the Iraqi government it's a Shia-dominated government. Those protests you mentioned, which have been happening over the last several months, largely been about corruption and also Iranian domination of the government. You also got this sort of like architecture of militias that are officially kind of part of the state, but also sort of loyal to and backed by Iran. A very tricky situation.
Exactly. They're kind of hybrid actors. And on the one hand, these were the young people who gathered from communities across Iraq to go fight ISIS. And,
yes, they went, I mean, let's be clear, like, we were on the same side as them as they rolled back ISIS.
And on the other hand, attached to that same name, Hashd-e-Shaabi, the militias of Iraq, are also people who reported to Qasem Soleimani and not to the Iraqi government. People who launched rocket attacks that killed not only Americans, but also Iraqis. So Iraq has a chronic and serious militia problem that Iraq is going to have to deal with. It became an acute problem for the United States when we concluded it next to this max pressure campaign against Iran. This is going to be a problem that's going to bedevil Iraq for a long time to come, with or without Qasem Soleimani.
Well, part of also what's so breathtaking here is that this is an assassination, it appears, of a official state guest of Iraq. I mean, you've got Qasem Soleimani. You've also got the head of another militia who appears to be killed, being in these reports. I don't even know if that's legal under the AUMF that we just kill someone in another state.
Yeah, it's a great question. American troops are in Iraq at the invited presence of the Iraqi government to fight ISIS and train Iraqi forces. Now, when you have Iranian-backed Iraqi militias attacking Americans and launching rockets that kill Americans, one could make an argument that this is a form of self-defense or preemption. But I think over time, the bigger question is if we lose that invitation from the Iraqi state, which, as you said, is close to Iran, but also close to Washington, if this killing causes us to lose that, we may be sacrificing our partnership with Iraq to pressure a campaign against Iran.
And Cal, as you know, having reported from Iraq, I mean, the sort of cross pressure of Iraq, which is next door to Iran, it's a majority Shia country, very, very connected to the Iranian regime and sort of more so as the years have gone on, and also the fact that it is an ally ostensibly of the U.S. and has invited U.S. soldiers in, that's been a very difficult thing for Iraq to negotiate. And if this report is true, it just got way more difficult.
It puts Iraq and Iran in many ways up against the wall and in very difficult positions. Qasem Soleimani, for all intents and purposes, for American soldiers who served in Iraq, was a top terrorist. The Iranians were targeting Americans. Yep. This was one of the stories of the Iraq War. Since the Iran nuclear agreement fell apart, however, so did the communication in large part between the U.S. and Iran. This is the most stark communication that we have seen from President Trump to the Iranians since tensions had risen. And now the Iranians are in a position where certainly domestically, we're certainly in the eyes of Iraq, we're certainly in the eyes of Syria, we're certainly in the eyes of Lebanese Hezbollah, they may feel like they have to respond. I think, it's going to take some time for this to sink in, but certainly the Iranian government is going to have to sort of figure out how do they satisfy domestic consumption? How do they respond? Who is the steady hand that is needed? And right now, I think we can sort of all agree as we look at the geopolitics of what's going on, there is not that steady hand to step in and get both sides to sort of back down. Things were majorly ratcheted up tonight, and normally it's the U.S. that's urging calm and is urging everybody to hold their fire.
Yeah, and the other context here, of course, is that these sort of, you've got increasing pressure on the Iranian regime because of sanctions being ratcheted up. There have been protests in Iran that have been met with incredibly intense force. There have been protests in Iraq that have been met with incredibly intense force, deadly force. I mean, hundreds killed in the streets by those forces. You wonder about, there's always sort of this question about war as a means of sort of tamping down domestic complaint, right? That like you sort of focus people on external enemies and how that shapes the context of internal politics there as this sinks in and sort of ripples out.
No, I think inside Iran you can expect a big rally around the flag effect for Qasem Soleimani. I think inside Iraq, it's going to be a much more complicated situation. He helped them fight ISIS, but he's also responsible for the death of protesters. Iraq, in general, dislikes being caught in the middle between America and Iran. What one Iraqi said to me was, when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. Right. And they're caught in the middle here in a big way, and it's not good for Iraq.
Our own reporter Cal Perry on the phone, Dan Ben-Eim at the Center for American Progress, formerly at the State Department in the Obama administration. Thank you, gentlemen, both. Once again, the big news this evening, Iraqi State TV reporting that the head of the Quds Force, the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, has been killed in a strike, along with the head of an Iraqi militia that was backed by Iran, apparently in the same convoy. That's what the reports indicate. We have no hard confirmation of that being the case. Other folks speaking to reporters at other outlets, including on the Washington Post, have seemed to confirm that. We have no confirmation. We certainly have no official notice from the American government, no claim of credit for that strike, although everyone assumes that this was an American undertaking if, in fact, it happened. As I said before, Soleimani, who has been a ruthless, bloody figure throughout the crescent of the Middle East, also a very, very powerful figure in Iran, a very well-known figure publicly. And if, in fact, Iraqi State TV is accurate on this, this represents a massive escalation in the military tensions between the U.S., Iran, with Iraq there. We're going to continue to follow that story. We'll be right back.